June 2001, Willow Creek, Georgia. A summer party ends. At 11:45 p.m., 20-year-old Sophia Martinez climbs into a blue Toyota Corolla and heads home. She never arrives. By morning, she is missing, her phone silent, her room untouched, the porch light left on. A white sandal turns up on a dirt shoulder near the Chattahoochee. Faint tire marks point off the road. No witnesses. No car. Within months, the search fades and the file becomes a cold case. Police start where most stories begin. Friends, family, routine. An ex-boyfriend with video-backed alibi. A co-worker with attitude, no evidence. Relatives questioned, then cleared. The Corolla vanishes as completely as Sophia. Every year the town gathers with candles. Every year the same question. Where did she go? 2 decades pass. Then rain pounds North Georgia in March 2022. Water levels drop in a farm retention pond. A farmer calls in a discovery. The outline of a buried sedan. Crews lift a blue Corolla from the mud. Inside are a purse, a broken silver S necklace, and remains confirmed as Sophia through DNA. Forensics find male DNA on the necklace and the passenger floor. Analysts recover and enhance an old traffic clip, a red Ford F-150 shadowing a compact car on Sophia's route. DMV records point to a familiar name. He left the church picnic early that night, a neighbor recalls. Said he had things to do. A friend adds, Sophia said someone had been following her lately. We didn't think it was real. This is the story of a disappearance, the long freeze of a cold case, and the discovery that reopened everything. The timeline is tight. The evidence is specific. The outcome reshaped a Georgia town. Stay with us as we retrace Sophia's last drive, reveal the forensic trail, and examine the arrest and verdict. Tell us what detail stands out to you, and share this episode so more eyes see the evidence. It was June 2000. The first hours of the search were critical. Officers retraced her route from the party to her neighborhood, scanning for any signs of the car. But the roads were quiet, and there was no trace of Sophia. That afternoon, the Martinez family and dozens of friends joined the effort. Flyers with her picture were quickly printed and handed out across town. By the evening, the search expanded. Police helicopters circled above, shining lights over the Chattahoochee River. Canine units moved along dirt paths and through the thick woods around Willow Creek. Volunteers split into small groups and combed the streets, fields, and abandoned buildings. It was during this first search that a discovery was made. On a rural roadside, officers found a single white sandal lying in the dirt. A few feet away were faint tire marks pressed into the soil but already beginning to fade. Investigators could not confirm whether the sandal belonged to Sophia, but it quickly became the first possible clue. Despite the intensive search, there were no other signs of her. The Corolla was gone. No surveillance cameras covered the roads she traveled. No eyewitnesses reported seeing her car after she left the party. In the words of one officer, it was as if she vanished between one street light and the next. As the hours stretched into a full day, the mood in Willow Creek shifted. People who had never met Sophia joined the effort, walking the trails, checking barns, searching the riverbanks. Churches opened their doors for prayer vigils. The story spread across local news stations. The face of a smiling young student now broadcast every evening. But even with the town mobilized, the investigation quickly hit a wall. Detectives questioned party guests again and again, asking if Sophia had argued with anyone that night. Every witness confirmed the same story. She left alone, in good spirits, with plans to be home before midnight. Her ex-boyfriend was interviewed, but cleared after providing a solid alibi, supported by video evidence. A co-worker from the diner where she worked part-time was also questioned, but no evidence linked him to the case. Family members were interviewed extensively, but police found nothing suspicious. Within days, the pool of suspects narrowed to the disappearance of Sophia Martinez left Willow Creek shaken. A young woman had driven out of a party, taken a route she knew by heart, and never returned. For her family, it was the beginning of a nightmare. For investigators, it was the start of a case that would stretch on for more than 2 decades. And for the community, it became a story that would haunt them for years. One night, one drive, and then nothing. When Sophia Martinez vanished in June 2001, investigators in Willow Creek knew the first hours would be critical. Missing person cases often hinge on what is found or not found in that first day. Police moved quickly. They retraced the short route from the summer graduation party back to her home. It should have taken Sophia no more than 15 minutes to arrive, but she never made it. The first obstacle? There were no security cameras along the rural roads she traveled. In 2001, small towns like Willow Creek did not have surveillance on every corner. Investigators were left with eyewitnesses. They interviewed partygoers. Most of them agreed on one detail. Sophia left alone just before midnight, driving her blue Toyota Corolla. No one saw her with another person. No one noticed a suspicious car following her. That gave police little to work with. Then came the discovery. About 2 miles from the party site, searchers found a white sandal on the side of the road. It matched the style Sophia was wearing that night. Near it, faint tire impressions cut into the dirt. The marks were too blurred to identify a make or model. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle. Still, investigators treated the spot as the first potential crime scene. Forensic technicians collected soil samples and searched for fibers or fingerprints. Nothing conclusive was found. With so little physical evidence, detectives turned their attention to people in Sophia's life. They believed that if she had been harmed, it was likely by someone who knew her. The first name that came up was Ryan Keller, Sophia's ex-boyfriend. Their breakup had been recent and, according to friends, tense. Attention then shifted to Sophia's workplace. She had a part-time job at a diner just off the highway. One of her co-workers, a man in his late 20s, had shown what many described as uncomfortable interest in her. Other employees recalled how he often lingered after shifts to talk with her. Some said he once offered to give her rides home. Detectives questioned him several times. They searched his car and apartment. No incriminating evidence was found. Without proof, suspicion wasn't enough. He was released, but the cloud of doubt hung over him for years in the community's memory. Family members were not exempt. Investigators always start close to home. They looked into Sophia's relatives, questioning them about the night she disappeared. Every timeline was checked. Alibis were verified. Nothing suggested a family member was involved. There was no motive, no opportunity that matched the facts. Her parents and siblings were quickly cleared. Despite these leads, the investigation hit walls. The missing Toyota Corolla was the biggest mystery. Cars do not simply vanish. Detectives considered every possibility: stolen, abandoned, hidden in the woods, or driven into a body of water. Search teams combed the dirt roads, riverbanks, and nearby forests. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning the landscape. Divers swept stretches of the Chattahoochee River. Nothing surfaced. The absence of the vehicle was a constant frustration. Without it, investigators lacked what could have been the strongest source of evidence. Witness canvassing produced little. No one remembered seeing Sophia's car on the main road home. No one reported a chase, a crash, or any unusual commotion. In a town where everyone seemed to know each other, the silence was deafening. As the days stretched into weeks, pressure mounted. Media outlets across Georgia began covering the case. Headlines asked, "Where is Sophia Martinez?" Local television aired nightly updates showing the sandal, replaying interviews with distraught family members. The attention only fueled speculation. In diners, churches, behind the scenes, investigators clashed over theories. Some believed Sophia had been targeted by someone she knew. Others argued a random predator could have intercepted her on the lonely roads. But with no car, no body, and no solid suspects, both theories stalled. The months dragged on. As summer turned to fall, the case file thickened with interviews, evidence logs, and dead-end leads. Detectives re-interviewed the same people, hoping someone would slip up. They looked again at Ryan Keller, probing his past relationships, his friends, his behavior. They looked again at the co-worker, chasing down rumors of inappropriate comments. They even revisited minor acquaintances, classmates, neighbors, old friends. Every path circled back to the same dead end. By winter, frustration gave way to resignation. 6 months after Sophia vanished, the official investigation slowed. No charges were filed. No suspects named publicly. The case was marked pending investigation and placed into storage. For Sophia's family, it was devastating. For the community, unsettling. People locked their doors a little earlier. Parents warned their daughters to travel in groups. Yet the lack of resolution also created division. Some residents defended the ex-boyfriend, insisting the police had unfairly targeted him. Others believed the co-worker was guilty but had slipped through the cracks. And then there were those who thought Sophia had been taken by someone passing through, a face they would never identify. The sandal and the faint tire marks remained the only physical clues. Investigators could never prove if they belonged to the crime, or if they were coincidence. Without the car, without the victim, every lead dissolved into speculation. The case of Sophia Martinez, only months old, had already taken on the character of a cold case. A young woman left a party, got into her car, and was never seen again. The people who might have been responsible, an ex-boyfriend, a co-worker, even a stranger, were investigated, questioned, and released. The community was left with questions and a gnawing sense of unease. And so, by the end of 2001, Willow Creek faced a haunting reality. Her parents refused to stay silent. They appeared on local television pleading for information. They stood in front of cameras holding photos of Sophia, asking anyone who knew something to come forward. "If you saw her, if you know anything, please help us," her mother told the press. The family also turned private grief into public remembrance. Every year on June 9th, they organized a candlelight vigil at Willow Creek's town square. The first year, a small circle of friends and relatives gathered. By the fifth year, hundreds were coming. Neighbors, classmates, co-workers. The local church joined in, leading prayers and hymns. For 2 decades, the vigil became part of the town's calendar. People who had never even met Sophia came to honor her, lighting candles and whispering her name into the night air. The media followed closely in the beginning. Newspapers ran her photo on their front pages, with headlines asking for leads. Television crews filmed at the vigils, capturing the glow of candles spread across the square. Flyers with her face and description were stapled to telephone poles, taped to grocery store windows, pinned on bulletin boards in schools and churches. For a while, Sophia's image was everywhere. The Latino community in Georgia rallied behind the family. Community leaders demanded that the state dedicate more resources to the case. They held fundraisers to print flyers and support the search efforts. But as months turned into years, media attention waned. The stories moved off the front pages. The TV stations stopped sending crews. Yet the Martinez family and a small group of dedicated neighbors kept going, determined not to let Sophia's name disappear. Rumors filled the silence left by the lack of progress. There were reports of sightings in Atlanta, then in Savannah. Some claimed to have seen her walking the streets in Florida. Each time the family's hopes lifted, only to crash again when investigators confirmed the reports were false. These false leads added another layer of pain. They dangled the possibility of answers, then dissolved into nothing. Still, the family pressed forward. They attended community meetings. They handed out flyers again and again. They visited schools to warn students about safety, urging them not to walk home alone at night. Sophia's case became a cautionary tale in Willow Creek. Local schools held safety workshops, using her case as an example of why vigilance mattered. Police officers visited classrooms, telling students to stay in groups, to trust their instincts, to speak up if they felt unsafe. For the young people of Willow Creek, Sophia's name was tied not only to tragedy, but also to a message of caution. By the early 2000s, the vigils had grown quieter, but they never stopped. Even when the case slipped from headlines, her family's devotion made sure no one could forget entirely. The image of Sophia remained etched into the community's memory. Every candle lit in her honor reminded Willow Creek of a promise, that one day, answers would come. In the months after Sophia Martinez vanished, every lead had been chased, every rumor checked. By the end of 2001, investigators had nothing new to show the family. The case was marked as pending investigation, a quiet label that meant no active leads, no active suspects, and no clear direction forward. By 2002, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation formally listed the disappearance of Sophia Martinez as a cold case. The file was boxed, coded, and placed in long rows of storage. Inside, hundreds of pages, statements, photographs, lab reports, all sitting without a conclusion. There were no new physical clues, no new witnesses, no forensic match. For most cases, this is where the trail dies. But for the Martinez family, silence was not acceptable. Sophia's parents refused to let her name vanish into a file cabinet. They called the police station regularly, sometimes every week, only to hear the same answer: there's no progress. Still, they kept pushing. They appeared on local television, holding up her picture, asking for any piece of information that could help. They pleaded with neighbors, with strangers, with anyone who would listen. "Please don't forget Sophia," her mother told reporters in one interview. Every June, on the anniversary of her disappearance, the family organized a candlelight vigil in the town square of Willow Creek. At first, hundreds of people came. Friends from school, co-workers, teachers, church members, even people who had never met Sophia but felt the weight of her story. Over time, the crowd became smaller. A decade later, only the closest friends and a few faithful neighbors continued to stand with the family. Yet the vigil never stopped. The Martinez family made sure of that. The town carried the case like an open wound. In the early years, the local press covered every development, every press conference, every rumor. But by 2005, the coverage slowed. Other stories took over. Sophia's name appeared only in brief anniversary mentions or during the annual gatherings. For the media, it became yesterday's mystery. For Willow Creek, it never stopped being today's fear. Rumors filled the silence left by the investigation. Some insisted Sophia had left voluntarily, running from the pressures of school and family. Others swore she had been abducted and taken out of the state. When social media became popular in the late 2000s, the rumors spread further. By the 2000s, posts began appearing, sightings in Atlanta, Savannah, even Florida. Each one gave the family a brief flicker of hope, only to end in crushing disappointment. Every report was checked, and every single one proved false. Through all of this, the Martinez home remained unchanged. Her room was preserved exactly as it had been in June 2001. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Books and papers stayed on the desk. And every night, the porch light was left on, a signal, a vigil of its own. The disappearance also changed Willow Creek itself. Parents began setting strict curfews. Teenagers avoided walking alone at night. The dirt roads and wooded paths around the Chattahoochee were no longer shortcuts, but places to be feared. The school district even began holding safety workshops, often using Sophia's case as the example of why vigilance mattered. As years turned into decades, the case hardened into legend. The question lingered: what really happened that night in 2001? And could the truth ever be known? By 2021, the investigation had been dormant for nearly 20 years. No new suspects, no new evidence. Many in town accepted that Sophia's disappearance would remain unsolved, perhaps forever. Some called it a tragic accident. Others believed the answer was buried too deep to ever surface. But the Martinez family never gave in. They stood at the vigils. They answered every reporter. They refused to pack away the hope of justice. Sophia deserves the truth, her father told a small gathering in 2021. And we will not stop. The cold silence of 2 decades seemed unbreakable. Yet within a year, the waters around Willow Creek would shift, and a discovery long hidden beneath the surface would change everything. It had been 21 years since Sophia Martinez vanished from Willow Creek, Georgia. For 2 decades, her case sat buried in the files of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, stamped as a cold case with no answers and no clear direction. Then, in March 2022, nature itself delivered the first real break investigators had been waiting for. That spring, an unusually heavy rainstorm swept across northern Georgia. It wasn't the kind of rain Willow Creek was used to. It poured for days, swelling rivers, flooding fields, and loosening soil. When the storm finally passed, water levels in nearby reservoirs and farm ponds dropped in sudden, uneven ways. What had been covered for years was suddenly exposed. On the morning of March 18th, local farmer Miguel Alvarez walked the edges of his property, checking the soil for damage after the storm. His land bordered a reservoir that had always been murky, dark, and still. But on this day, Alvarez noticed something strange sticking out of the muddy shoreline. At first glance, it looked like a piece of scrap metal or an old fence post. But as he moved closer, he saw the curved roofline of a car. Rusted, broken, and nearly buried under layers of silt. He froze. Then he pulled out his phone and called the sheriff's office. Within the hour, deputies arrived at the scene. They confirmed what Alvarez suspected. This wasn't just a random junked car. It was submerged in a section of water less than 30 feet from the bank, its frame tilted at a sharp angle, nose down in the mud. Deputies immediately notified the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Unit. The discovery sent shockwaves through law enforcement. After 2 decades of false leads and silence, there was finally something real to work with. Investigators wasted no time. The Corolla was transported to a secure forensic facility. Every detail mattered now. Every fragment could mean the difference between another dead end and a path to the truth. Inside the car, evidence lay preserved by mud, water, and time. On the passenger seat, they found Sophia's wallet. It still held her driver's license, student ID, and a few faded receipts. In the center console, a broken silver necklace with the letter S on its charm rested under layers of grime. Her parents would later confirm it had belonged to Sophia, a gift she rarely took off. More disturbing evidence was also uncovered. Dried blood stained the fabric of the front passenger seat and the floor mat beneath it. Forensic teams carefully cut away samples for DNA analysis. Then came the most sobering discovery of all. Behind the wheel, buckled into the driver's seat, were skeletal remains. Time and water had reduced the body to bone, but personal belongings in the pockets and the necklace confirmed what investigators already feared. DNA testing later provided certainty. It was Sophia Martinez. The finding was both heartbreaking and crucial. After 21 years, the Martinez family finally had confirmation that Sophia had not simply run away or vanished into thin air. Her body had been inside that car the entire time, just 1.5 miles outside of town. But the details didn't suggest an accident. Quite the opposite. Forensic specialists examined the Corolla's exterior. They noted scratches and impact marks along the rear bumper and trunk area, consistent with a forceful push. The angle of entry into the water was steep, not gradual. The car had entered nose first, as if shoved from behind. On the muddy bank above the reservoir, investigators identified faint, degraded impressions. Even after years of erosion, the soil still bore traces of tire marks leading toward the water. The pattern suggested another vehicle had been present, one powerful enough to force the Corolla off the embankment. And there was something else missing. If Sophia had accidentally driven into the reservoir, investigators would expect to see evidence of braking, deep grooves, churned dirt, skid marks. In Willow Creek, the impact was immediate and emotional. Residents who remembered Sophia as the smiling 20-year-old who disappeared after a summer party gathered at the scene, standing in silence as the car was pulled from the mud. Many wept. Some whispered prayers. For them, the unanswered question that had haunted the town for years had finally reached a turning point. Sophia's parents, who had left the porch light on for her every night since 2001, were informed later that day. For 2 decades, they had waited for news, any news. The confirmation that their daughter's remains had been found was devastating, but it also brought clarity. The endless uncertainty was over. The case was immediately handed back to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Division. Detective Laura Green, who had recently been assigned to review dormant files, stepped forward as lead investigator. She told reporters, The discovery of Sophia's car changes everything. We are no longer asking what happened. We are asking who did this and why. At the forensic lab, every item from the Corolla was cataloged and tested. The blood samples on the passenger seat were the first priority. Early results confirmed it was human blood and not Sophia's. That meant someone else had been inside that car. Technicians swabbed the steering wheel, gear shift, and door handles. Despite the years underwater, fragments of touch DNA were recovered. Samples were processed and prepared for entry into SODIS, the National DNA Database. The silver necklace, broken at the clasp, raised additional questions. Was it ripped from Sophia during a struggle? Did it break before the car went into the water? Specialists examined the metal under magnification, noting stress fractures consistent with sudden force. It looked less like an old piece of jewelry failing on its own, and more like something torn apart. For investigators, these were the puzzle pieces they had been missing for 2 decades. The car itself, the condition of the remains, the presence of another person's DNA, and the evidence that the vehicle was forced into the reservoir, all of it pointed toward foul play. At a press conference days later, the GBI for the Martinez family, the focus shifted from uncertainty to justice. Sophia's brother, Carlos, stood outside their family home and told reporters, "We've lived with questions for so long. Now we need answers. Whoever did this needs to be held accountable." The investigation moved forward with renewed urgency. Detectives reviewed old witness statements, compared them to the new evidence, and searched for overlooked details. They also prepared to release a call for fresh tips from the public, hoping that the discovery of the car might jog someone's memory. But the most promising leads would not come from rumors or faded recollections. They would come from the hard science of forensic testing. The DNA lifted from inside the Corolla was now in the system, waiting for a match. What investigators didn't know yet was that the DNA profile would soon connect the case directly to someone who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with the Martinez family at candlelight vigils. Someone who had smiled, prayed, and offered support for years. Someone who had lived in Willow Creek the entire time. The breakthrough discovery had brought Sophia home. The forensic evidence about to emerge would bring them face to face with her killer. And that takes us to the next chapter of this case, the science that unlocked the truth and the suspect it exposed. When the Toyota Corolla was pulled from the reservoir in March 2022, investigators knew they had reached a turning point. For 21 years, the Martinez family had lived without answers. Now the car was in front of them, rusted, battered, but still holding secrets. Every inch of the vehicle was treated as a crime scene. The forensics team moved slowly, careful not to destroy fragile evidence that had survived decades underwater. On the passenger seat and the floor mat beneath, dried stains caught the light. Even after so many years, they had not fully washed away. Lab analysis confirmed it was human blood. The next step was critical: comparison against Sophia's DNA. Within hours, the results came back. The blood did not belong to her. It belonged to someone else. That discovery changed everything. The DNA fragments were submitted to CODIs, the federal database used to match samples against offenders across the country. Days later, a notification arrived. A hit. The DNA belonged to David Harper, 46 years old, a former neighbor of the Martinez family. Harper was not just any match. In 2001, he had been 26, living only a few houses away from Sophia's family. He worked as a local mechanic, known for fixing cars out of his garage. At first glance, Harper had always seemed ordinary. Many remembered him as someone quick to help with errands or small repairs. He attended church events, volunteered at food drives, and often stood beside the Martinez family during annual vigils for Sophia. One longtime resident told reporters later, "He was the last person you would think of. He'd be there shaking your hand, smiling, asking if you needed help." That facade now looked very different. Harper's background revealed more troubling details. He had been arrested once for harassment after following a woman home from work, but the charges had been dropped. There were whispers of unwanted advances toward young women in town, though nothing had ever gone to court. At the time, police saw him as harmless, a little strange, but nothing more. The discovery in Sophia's car turned those assumptions upside down. Forensic breakthroughs didn't stop with DNA. The cold case team also re-examined old surveillance footage. In 2001, Georgia's Department of Transportation had recorded low-quality traffic videos from key intersections. Those tapes had been stored, forgotten, in a state archive. Digital restoration technology in 2022 allowed investigators to sharpen the grainy images. On the night Sophia vanished, at approximately 11:55 p.m., a green Toyota Corolla was captured traveling south on County Road 14. Just seconds later, a red Ford F-150 pickup appeared behind it. The truck followed closely, frame after frame, until both vehicles left the camera's view. Registration records confirmed the pickup belonged to David Harper. That was the missing piece. Sophia's car had not been alone that night. Harper's truck had been... The combination of DNA, video, and physical evidence began forming a chain that pointed directly to Harper. Detectives reconstructed the likely sequence. Sophia left the graduation party just before midnight. Harper, driving his red Ford, followed her. Somewhere along the dark stretch near the reservoir, he intercepted or forced her off the road. There was a struggle. Her sandal and the faint tire marks found in 2001 were the only visible signs left behind. Harper ended up inside her car long enough to leave blood and DNA. Then the Corolla, with Sophia restrained inside, was pushed into the water. For more than 2 decades, the secret stayed hidden beneath the reservoir's surface. Despite the overwhelming discoveries, investigators knew one lesson well. Forensic evidence alone does not always guarantee a conviction. Defense lawyers would argue contamination, chain of custody errors, or natural degradation after years underwater. The blood could be challenged as transfer, the DNA as touch, without proof of violence. To win in court, detectives needed more. They needed a strategy. Georgia Bureau of Investigation launched quiet surveillance on Harper. His house, phone records, and daily routes were monitored. Detectives wanted to see if he might slip, confess to someone, or reveal old habits. They also revisited witnesses from 2001, asking them to look back with fresh eyes. Several remembered Harper hanging around Sophia's neighborhood in the weeks before she vanished. One woman recalled, "He used to drive by slow, like he was watching something. Back then I thought it was nothing. Now it chills me." Investigators also reviewed Harper's financial records. In the summer of 2001, just weeks after Sophia disappeared, Harper had sold his Ford pickup. He claimed it was too old and replaced it with a newer model. At the time, no one questioned it. Now that sale looked suspicious. Detectives tracked down the truck's history. Although the vehicle itself was gone, paperwork confirmed it had been his. The circumstantial evidence stacked higher and higher. Combined with the DNA match, the broken necklace, the surveillance footage, and a press officer prepared the community. We have evidence today that was not available in 2001. Science has advanced, and what we now know leaves no room for doubt. The news spread quickly through law enforcement circles. A 21-year-old cold case was about to reach its breaking point. Families of other missing persons watched closely. If science could solve Sophia's case, maybe theirs too would find answers. For the Martinez family, the developments were both painful and necessary. After years of waiting, they finally had a name. The man who had stood beside them at vigils, praying for Sophia, was now the prime suspect in her disappearance. The betrayal ran deep. By the end of the month, the surveillance operation was ready to close. Detectives had their evidence. Harper would not walk away again. The next chapter in this story would not take place in a lab or at a crime scene, but in a courtroom. It was time to bring the suspect in. The evidence was overwhelming, the trail impossible to ignore. But how would the community react when the man they trusted was suddenly accused of a crime buried for 21 years? Stay with us as we move into Part 7, where the arrest shakes Willow Creek to its core. And let us know in the comments, do you believe the DNA evidence alone should have been enough to take Harper down? Or was the surveillance operation the final push that sealed his fate? In January 2023, the courthouse in Fulton County, Georgia, became the center of attention. It had been more than 2 decades since Sophia Martinez vanished. For years, her case sat cold, her family waiting for answers. Now the trial of David Harper, the man accused of ending her life, was about to begin. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the aisles. Cameras waited outside. Residents of Willow Creek traveled to Atlanta to see the proceedings. The Martinez family sat quietly in the front row, holding hands. The air was heavy, tense. Everyone knew this was not just another trial. It was the most important cold case Fulton County had ever seen. The prosecution opened with one clear message. The evidence tied Harper directly to Sophia's disappearance. They laid out, and then the video. Grainy footage recovered from an old traffic camera on Route 19, just outside Willow Creek. The night Sophia disappeared, a red Ford F-150 followed closely behind her car. Investigators confirmed the truck belonged to David Harper. Combined, these pieces painted a story the prosecution said could not be ignored. The defense countered with equal energy. Harper's attorney argued that the DNA evidence was unreliable. The Corolla had been submerged for 2 decades. Water damage, contamination, mishandling, any of these, the defense claimed, could have corrupted the results. "This is circumstantial," the attorney insisted. "It does not prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." They reminded the jury that no one had ever seen Harper with Sophia on the night she vanished. No eyewitnesses. No direct link. The attorney also worked to restore Harper's image, describing him as a long-standing member of the community, someone who attended church regularly and volunteered to help neighbors. "He stood with the Martinez family at vigils," the defense stressed. "Does that sound like a guilty man?" But the prosecution was ready. They called witnesses who had known Harper in the early 2000s. Several women testified that Harper harassed them. Some described inappropriate comments. Others said he followed them late at night. At the time, they had brushed it off, too intimidated to come forward. Now their testimony revealed a pattern. Harper was not the man his neighbors thought he was. One former neighbor gave particularly striking testimony. She told the jury she had seen Harper's truck circling the Martinez neighborhood the night Sophia disappeared. At the time, she did not think much of it. But when she learned years later that Harper was under investigation, the memory returned with clarity. "It was his truck," she said firmly. The prosecution also brought in forensic experts. They explained the DNA process in detail. Samples had been preserved carefully, tested repeatedly, and confirmed by independent labs. The idea of contamination, they said, was unlikely. "These results are clear and scientifically sound," one expert testified. "They place David Harper inside that car." The jury deliberated for less than a day. Hours later, they returned with their decision. The courtroom went silent as the four persons stood. David Harper was found guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. Gasps filled the room. Some people cried, others sighed in relief. The judge pronounced the sentence: life in prison, without parole. Harper sat motionless, his expression blank. He showed no reaction as deputies led him away in handcuffs. The Martinez family broke down in tears. For them, the ruling was both devastating and relieving. They had lost Sophia forever, but at last the truth was recognized. Outside, reporters captured the moment as the family embraced, repeating the words, "Justice for Sophia." For Willow Creek, the verdict was a turning point. Residents who had once trusted Harper now confronted the reality of who he really was. "We thought he was one of us," a church member admitted. "We were wrong." The sense of betrayal was deep, but so was the feeling of closure. Headlines spread quickly. "Justice for Sophia Martinez after 2 decades," and "Neighbor convicted in Georgia cold case." National outlets picked up the story, holding it as an example of what forensic science and persistence could achieve. The verdict did not erase the pain of the past 21 years, but it gave the Martinez family and their community the truth they had waited so long to hear. June 2023 marked a moment the people of Willow Creek had waited for more than 2 decades. The Martinez family stood at the edge of the reservoir where Sophia's car had been pulled from the mud the year before. Friends, neighbors, and hundreds from the community gathered with candles in hand. At the water's edge, the family placed a small stone marker carved with the words, "Justice may be delayed, but never denied." The ceremony was quiet, heavy, but it carried a sense of closure that had been missing for 21 years. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation sent representatives that night. For them, Sophia's case had become more than just a file number. It was now a case study. They confirmed the impact reached further than police training. Lawmakers in Atlanta introduced and passed a funding bill that same year. The bill dedicated millions in new resources for forensic labs, data recovery, and advanced DNA testing. Officials said the Martinez case was the turning point. "This case shows why cold cases must never be abandoned," one legislator declared on the floor. Forensic experts across the state soon had access to faster DNA testing and new methods for recovering data from damaged tapes and cameras. At Sophia's former university, another tribute took shape. Faculty and alumni worked with the Martinez family to establish the Sophia Martinez Nursing Scholarship. Sophia had been studying nursing before she disappeared, and the scholarship was created to carry that dream forward. Each year, students now receive financial support in her name. Local papers reported that applications to the scholarship doubled expectations in its very first year. For Sophia's family, it was more than symbolic. It was proof her future could still touch the lives of others. National coverage highlighted the case as one of Georgia's most important solved cold cases. Families with missing loved ones reached out to the Martinezes, saying Sophia's story gave them hope. Some called her case a reminder that answers can still come even decades later. Community groups in other states began holding workshops inspired by the Willow Creek vigils, teaching people how to push for attention to unsolved cases. The lesson was simple: do not dismiss small details, and do not ignore early witness statements. The family's own words carried the deepest impact. Standing before reporters after the trial, Sophia's parents said, "We never gave up, and no family should ever stop searching for the truth." That sentence was repeated on television, in newspapers, and later on social media campaigns for other cold cases. For many, it became a rallying cry. In Willow Creek itself, the changes were visible. The town had lived under the shadow of Sophia's disappearance for 21 years. With the verdict, there was finally closure, but not forgetfulness. Annual candlelight events continued, no longer just a search for answers. The meaning of the case stretched beyond one family or one town. It was proof that forensic science, when supported and funded, can break through the silence of decades. It showed that even trusted faces in a community can hide dangerous secrets, and that ignoring early warning signs can cost years of lost truth. Above all, it proved that persistence works, that families, investigators, and communities can still force justice into the light. Sophia Martinez now lives on not only in memory, but in policy, in education, and in the lives of future nurses who will benefit from the scholarship that carries her name. Her case reminds us that justice may come slowly, but it comes. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe more cold cases across the country could be solved with the same persistence and technology? Subscribe and stay with us. Our next case takes us deep into another disappearance that remained unsolved for years, until one piece of evidence changed everything.